Hello and welcome to episode 10 of BelPod, the podcast dedicated to Belarusian football. This week in part 1 we'll cast our minds back to last weekend's cup final, take a look at the 2022 competition which is already underway, and also analyse the early stages of this season's Pershaya Liga. In part 2 we'll hear from Torpedo fan Adrian about the Belarusian football love of his life, before offering our own thoughts on the Rodino-based club's first third of the season. Finally, in part 3, we'll mull over the national team squad ahead of their unusual upcoming friendlies, before finishing with a look at the standout fixtures in week 11 of the Shakhtyor Liga. Hello again and welcome to our 2-weekly or sometimes 3-weekly digest of what's going on in the world of Belarusian football. In this first part of the show tonight, we're going to focus on perhaps the biggest game of last weekend, which was the cup final, which was played in Gomel in front of a very reasonable sized crowd, and pretty much went to plan, didn't it, for BelAZ, although Isloch did give them a hell of a fight.
Yeah, hi Liam. I agree with you. I enjoyed the game. I thought Isloch held up their end very well. I think BelAZ are a side still with a lot of developing to do. There's this kind of odd hybrid between the BelAZ sides of old and the Nikaichiks and the Skavishes and so forth, and the new players, the Umarovs and the Noskos, young Kudrovets who's appeared in goal occasionally this season. So it's a side in transition, and I think they deserve to win. I don't think anyone, other than the most ardent romantic who wanted the underdog to win, would deny that. What was interesting for me, Liam, was that all the goals came from set pieces, didn't they? And both sides seem to have a real problem at the moment defending from set pieces.
It's interesting you should mention that, John, because I think this game, you just talked about some of the young players, and I think that Shakhtyor Umarov, who, as you know, I'm a big fan of him, I think he delivers an incredible set piece, and I have to say, I think he's got even better at that since he joined BelAZ in the close season. But we did see both sides of Umarov in the sense that he did supply the cross for the first goal, but then fell over in the penalty area, got himself booked, and then a few minutes later fell over again and could quite easily have got a second yellow card. I think Vitali was very unhappy about that. And I suppose that is part of, as what you say, the problem about it, isn't it? Trying to blend a few new players into the squad at the same time as some of the more experienced players perhaps being slowly edged out, and that is a transition process. But to be fair to them, while that transition is going on, they're playing some pretty great football and winning the games that you'd expect them to win, even when they seem to be up against it at times, like they were on the weekend. I felt, I mean, the highlights didn't really do Isloch justice for me. I felt it was a much closer game than the highlights suggested.
Yes, I'd agree with you, and I think Isloch, although they'll be immediately disappointed at the outcome, they can take an awful lot from that game. I think there's a very good group of young players there that, if they're kept together, can develop an enormous amount under Artem Radkov in the next 2 to 3 seasons. The worry for me is, what do they do when Komarovsky runs out of puff and decides to hang his boots up? Because in that side, Komarovsky is irreplaceable. He's their top scorer by miles. He's the sort of driving engine of the team as well. Someone with an awful lot of experience who's played at a very high level. And if you leave him out, and you leave, say, Gurenko out, who they signed from Vitebsk, it's a really inexperienced young team. And I think Komarovsky is absolutely critical. And it was no surprise to me that he scored the goal of the match, even though he was on the losing side. Although you would question BelAZ's goalkeeper's positioning there. He was 6 or 7 yards off his line without needing to be. And had he stayed in his line, then he could maybe have got a hand to that. But he kind of yorked himself, really, didn't he, by being off his line when the free kick was taken.
I wasn't desperately impressed with the wall, to be honest, either. I didn't think it was particularly well set up. So I think that killed him more than anything, to be honest. I have to say, I don't think he'd have got a hand on that. Komarovsky absolutely smashed it in off the but still, yeah, no, I think definitely it was an opportunity, that a door left open for Komarovsky, and he took full advantage of it, didn't he, with an absolutely cracking finish. So yeah, I suppose overall there is a wonder. I mean, obviously the young Lamrovsky's come in up front. He's got a couple of goals. I mean, but he's very young, isn't he? To take over that goal scoring mantle from Komarovsky is an awful lot to ask of him, and I suppose they're hoping that he hangs around for the rest of the season and keeps fit, and perhaps then hands over to the young pretender in due course once he's had perhaps 10, 15 games to get his feel for what it's like to play regularly in the Shakhtyor Liga.
Absolutely. And I think that inexperience showed as well for the winner, the way that the defence slightly lost its bearings a bit and Reback made a wonderful run, but no one was tracking him. And in a cup final, you can't allow a player like Reback pretty much free reign in front of your 6 yard box. And again, there'll be questions asked, I'm sure, in training at Eastlock's training complex to try and understand how that happened and to make sure that it doesn't come about again. But that's what you're going to get with an exciting young side, as well as the great moments, such as Komarovsky's free kick and some of the great attacking play that their midfield created. You are going to get these blunders as well, and it's just a learning and growing process for East Loch at the moment.
So BelAZ the Cup winners, as expected, despite an excellent effort from East Loch. But it's all a bit confusing in Belarus, isn't it, John, for most people, including myself, even though I should have got used to it by now, because whilst one cup competition from the previous season is being decided, the other cup competition, this year's cup competition, is well underway. Can you explain a little bit more about what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, there's been 2 rounds of the 2022 Belarusian Cup already. The round of 128 and the round of 64. So I think this is the third or second round. I don't know what the nomenclature is that we're going into this weekend. And 10 of the 12 Pershaya Liga teams have joined the competition. Krumkachi are top of the league at the moment, so they get a bye into the next round, which the stern faces of the ABFF must be absolutely delighted with. And of course, Shakhtyor Petrikov are a farm club, and they're not allowed to play in the competition. They're a farm club of Shakhtyor Soligorsk, of course. So yeah, we've got a round of 32, and there's some interesting ties. The most entertaining one, perhaps, is a petrochemical burn-off between Gazovik Vitebsk, or Vitebsk Gasworks, and Naftan Novopolotsk. And I think even in the poor form Naftan have been in this season, they'll stroll through that one. I think there's the other really interesting tie for me is Volnopinsk going to the new private team, BK Max line of Rogachev, who've started really well in the third tier, and Volna really blow hot and cold, so that could be a shock there. A couple of the lowly second tier teams are also going to tough places in the third tier, which they might find difficult. And just lastly, our old friend Smolovich here are running with an almost youth team in the Minsk Oblast League this year, are away to Lepel this time, and whoever gets through that will be into the draw with Krumkachi and I think the Vysheshaya Liga in the next round. So it's always fun when cup competitions are at this stage and small teams get their day out, and we'll see who survives into the next round.
I mean, obviously, I was aware of the principle that one cup competition starts the previous season, but I didn't expect the cup competition to start before the last one had ended. I thought it would be coming later on in the summer. Must have passed me by this time last year. But anyway, yes. So we've got some interesting cup ties this week. So no Pershaya Liga this weekend. But we haven't really talked much, John, yet, have we, about how the Pershaya Liga is shaping up after the initial phases? It's perhaps run through a bit of what's going on. I mean, obviously, we would expect Krumkachi to be up near the top, and they are, as you've mentioned. But what else is happening a bit lower down?
Well, as you say, Krumkachi are top, but they've really not caught fire yet. Liam, an awful lot of their wins have seemed to me to be quite laboured, and I think particularly of their game with backmarkers Baranovici, where they won 4-3, but Baranovici, who've only got 1 point from 7 games, could easily have won that game, and goalkeeper Coltigan had an astonishing double penalty save right at the death of that game. I'm afraid poor Baranovic must have smashed a plate glass mirror with the corpse of a black cat before the season started, because they've had an appalling run of luck so far. Arsenal were top until they lost to Belshina Bobruisk a couple of weeks ago, and they're interesting because Belshina, who looked absolutely appalling in the first 2 games of the season, have really picked up, and Vitaly Pavlov is really putting a stamp in that team. one or two influential players there. Really, Liam, the league is split into two groups. You'd expect Croomcatchy and Arsenal to be the top two come the end of the season. And then the playoff contender for the relegation promotion playoff could be anyone from third to seventh. So that at the moment, I think, is Shakhtyor Petrikov down to Dnepr Mogilev in seventh. When we were doing the prediction pre-season, we thought Dnepr would finish third, but they've not been as good as expected so far, and they're taking longer, I think, to find their feet. One of their top strikers, I think the boy Sidorenko, is out at the moment, and I think they're missing him. Then there's the bottom five, basically the also-rans trying to avoid the relegation playoff at the bottom of the table. It looks like it'll be Baranovici, but if their luck turns, then that could drag the likes of Orsha and Liga into matters as well. So we'll see how that develops.
Presumably, obviously, if Shakhtyor do finish third, they're not going to be allowed to play in the playoff, are they? Because they're not allowed to go up. So, yeah, so it's going to be one of those where I wonder what they'll do about that, whether they'll just get the fourth place team to play or...
I don't think they'll cancel the playoff. I think probably the fourth place team would take their place. But of course, the fourth place team could be Lokomotiv Gomel, who don't want promotion and don't have the infrastructure for it. So really, you're looking at Belshina, Volnopinsk and Dnepr as being the viable promotion candidates to the Vysheshaya for 2022.
Okay, so there was one other very big game in Belarus last weekend, other than the Cup final, and that was obviously between Shakhtyor and Dinamo Minsk, but it ended with a rather predictable outcome, didn't it? Albeit with another example of brilliant finishing from our friend Mr. Darbo.
Absolutely, quite a disappointing game, but then these high stakes games usually are. They rarely succeed in matching up to expectation. Dembo Darbo's goal was absolutely wonderful, another rocket shot. And really, I feel a bit embarrassed at being slightly sceptical about him in pre-season and after the first couple of games. But since he's found his feet in Belarus, he's in a league of his own, really. No one can touch him. And it may even be that he goes in the summer. They might try and cash in on him. But I hope he stays the full season in Sologorsk and chooses his next move very carefully. The bigger issue for me, Liam, is the mental state of Dinamo Minsk after the club's internal turmoil over the salary cap and Leonid Kuchuk's threat to resign if the club managers can't resolve the matter with the authorities. But I'm afraid the salary cap is a government decree, and I don't see that it can be solved even by taking it to court. And this could land Dinamo in all sorts of trouble, not only in the immediate future with their players, many of whom will simply leave in the July transfer window if they're not being paid what they were promised. I think the likes of Puzzolo, who wasn't around on Friday evening, will be first out the door. But they're also likely to be taken by the trade unions to the authorities in Europe for payment of unpaid wages. And one way or the other, they're going to have to pay these agreed contracted wages at some point. But how do you felt they played? I mean, even if we accept that there's some problem there with wages and behind the scenes, what did you make of their game overall last Friday?
It's a tricky one to call. I felt they were... Well, Kuchuk is always going to go into that kind of game with a slightly more conservative attitude. And as the game went on, I just felt that both teams probably would have settled for the draw. I felt that Shakhtyor were happy to keep Dinamo Minsk at arm's length, didn't want to lose. And similarly, I think that Dinamo Minsk were looking at it and thinking, we don't want to be any further behind than we are already. So I got the sense it was probably a bit of a stalemate. Neither side was willing to risk too much. Plenty of effort, plenty of endeavour. A little bit disappointed with the atmosphere, but I think a lot of that was to do with the kickoff time. I don't know the reasons behind that decision, but I felt that kicking off that early on a Friday evening, it just felt a bit flat, to be honest, in the stands. Our drummer wasn't there, or not even, he's not even a drummer, is he? But he's a drummer, but he's not a drummer as we know in the football sense. He's a proper drummer, like a rock band drummer. Didn't hear him, and people were still drifting into the game long after the game kicked off. I just felt that kind of contributed to it a bit. So that was part of the flatness that it felt, and also because neither side really wanted to lose the game. And then obviously, as you say, an absolutely superb piece of finishing. I don't know how Darby generates so much power there with no backlift at all. It literally just falls to him and he slaps it and it absolutely flies past the keepers. And so, yeah, like you, I hope he hangs around. I'd love to see him play in Europe, if that actually happens, of course, if they're allowed to travel outside of Belarus to play the European ties. But, him in a Champions League game, obviously, I think he would... We don't know, do we? We really don't know. But I'd love to see him pit his wits against a really strong European side, because I think he has got huge potential.
I agree with you completely. And I think one of our followers on the BelPod Twitter page was issuing a come and get him plea to the Stoke City chairman. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. He's not really a Michael O'Neill sort of player. But he reminds me a little bit in some ways of John Hartson with his physicality. One of the games I remember most in my football watching time was John Hartson playing for Wales up against two Italian centre-halves in the World Cup qualifier they won in Cardiff in 2003. And those guys, I think it was Cannavaro and someone else, they didn't know what had hit them. They had this big, built like a tank, 6'4" bag of cement, hitting them again and again and again and creating space for others. Now in that team, he was creating space for Craig Bellamy and Simon Davis, who were skillful wee players on the ground. Darbo's got everything. Darbo's got Hartson's physicality and Bellamy and Davis's skill, and that's a frightening prospect to face regardless. I hope he doesn't chase the money and go to Russia. I hope he goes to a team in Poland, maybe Germany or Sweden, as the next stage in his development. And he's just been called up to the Gambian squad for the first time by their manager. So his progress is really being noticed well beyond the borders of Belarus.
What I love about him as well is he isn't bothered if he gets it wrong. I mean, there was a shot that went out for a throw in the other day. It was the most horrendous connection with a volley you could ever wish to see. And for some players, that would absolutely destroy their confidence, even one of his ability that he's shown in the first 10 games of the season. But he just came back for more. And I think, as a final comment, his work rate off the ball, John, is just astounding. And when he loses the ball, you just see him. But he's not lazy, is he? He really, really gets around. So I don't wish to sound too much like a Dembo Darbo Appreciation Society that we're forming here, but I do think he has a lot of attributes that could take him a lot higher than the BPL. But in the meantime, we're delighted to have him in our league, and we very much hope that he stays there.
Absolutely. The Belarusian players and journalists call him the Tank. That's his nickname. He's been called the Tank very quickly because of these physical attributes that he has and his ability to cause a great deal of destruction despite your best efforts.
So that's the end of our roundup. That's the end of part one for today. We'll be back very shortly with part two. So in part two today, we're going to deal with our latest in a series of club profiles, and we're delighted to have a Torpedo Jardina fan today with us, doing the preview of his favourite Belarusian team. So over to you, Adrian.
Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure and a privilege. A big fan. And just here to give you a little bit of information on the mighty Torpedo Zadino. So you may know me from Twitter under the alias Clenny West or Yuri Puntus's White and Black Army. Formerly also Lippy Veloso, although that one is a little bit of a touchy subject right now. More commonly known in my day-to-day life though as Adrian. So like most people, I got into Belarusian football when the first lockdown struck, just trying to find any football to watch. And the team that I landed on was Torpedo Zadino. There was no science in that method. I looked at the league table, saw a few of the strips. Torpedo Zadino had the best one. So that's how I landed on it. I mean, it was quite difficult to resist the sultry charms of Slutsmine, but the shirt won out. So a little bit about the place. Dinamo is located pretty much slap bang in the centre of Belarus, approximately 50 kilometers from Minsk. City-wise, it's not the biggest in the world, about 65k population, and looking at it, there's not a great deal in terms of tourism, like sightseeing. The best I could find was a very charmingly named Irish pub called Irish Pub. So I would still love to get over there one day, see a game, and have a pint in the Irish pub. The city itself is dominated by the factory BelAZ. They are also the sponsors of the club, and they're a big part of the city. So onto the club. We were formed in 1961. For the most part, we've been a pretty consistent, established top division club. Playing in white, I would say we draw comparisons to Tottenham Hotspur. We've had regular top half finishes, finishing 4th, 5th, but very little silverware to show for it, with one solitary cup win back in 2016. In terms of the league, last season was our most successful yet, dramatically clinching 3rd place on the final day of the season, which was a really good way to end the season for me, at least. I know Dinamo Brest fans, Islok fans, Neyman fans probably might not think the same. However, it was a cracking day for me. Last year, our team was mostly driven by our Brazilian superstars in Lippe Veloso and Gabriel Ramos. Everything good came through them, and it was a bit of a bugbear losing them this season. We've not really recovered from it, to be honest. We're lacking a bit of attacking impetus, but we are trying to work on that. And we still have some quality players within the team. Other than them two, some of my favourite players from last season who are still here, I would go for Maxim Bordachev and Dmitry Yashin in centre-back. Both of them very strong physical players, but surprisingly good touch for a big man, not to sound too cliche. If you want a comparison for modern day times, I would go for maybe like a pound shop version of Rio Ferdinand and Vidic. So in centre midfield as well, we've got the heartbeat of our team. We've got Khachaturian. He's a bit of a veteran, but he's full of passion and guile. He's the player that really makes us tick. He gets the ball, he's got a good range of passing, and he just takes it from defence to attack. Most of our good things do come through him, whether it's breaking up play or playing a killer through ball. Our main hopes at the minute are, again, relying on some attacking flair from some Brazilians, so got some new signings in Oyer and Montero. So far, progress has been a bit slow integrating into the team, but when they have played, whether that's just a cameo off the bench, they have shown glimpses of real quality, and we're hoping that's going to be the thing that kickstarts the season. And the man in charge of doing that is Yuri Puntus, who himself, he's been around the block a fair few times, very experienced manager. He's previously managed the Belarusian national team, Bate, Dinamo Brest. He takes no nonsense, as shown in a few clips last season, but by all accounts, he's a great bloke, great person to work for, and if anyone's going to turn things around, it'll be him. Although it would be nice one day to see him smile, which I'm pretty sure I haven't seen yet. So season so far has been a little bit disappointing, but if anyone can turn it around, I believe it could be Big Yuri. Performances have picked up of late, and we'll have Europe to look forward to as well. So once the Brazilians find defeat, the only way is up. In Yuri we trust. Thanks for having me on anyway. A big fan of all that you do. I hope you keep up the good work. Back to you guys at the studio.
Many thanks for that, Adrian. Fantastic to hear from you. Fantastic to have people prepared to give it a go. I know for many people it's quite a daunting prospect, so we really, really appreciate your contribution because, let's face it, we don't want people to have to listen to us every week from start to finish banging on about Belarusian football. But we are going to bang on about Torpedo now, aren't we, John? Because we love talking about Torpedo. I was particularly amused, to be fair, by his mention of the Irish pub that's called Irish Pub. I must admit, I wouldn't mind a drink there as well. But just to clarify, BelAZ as well, the big company, the big employer of Jodina, they're monster trucks, aren't they? Is that correct?
That's right. Every third mining truck in the world sold is made by BelAZ. It's an enormous corporation, and the other big employers there are a clothes factory, and I'm sorry to say, one of the biggest prisons in the country. So many of last year's protesters ended up in Jordano prison for a while at least.
He did illustrate that overall he felt that the start of the season was a bit disappointing, which I suppose kind of really shows you where the bar is set for Torpedo, isn't it? I mean, they're not that far down the league table, but I suppose it's more about performances. And we saw another very Jekyll and Hyde performance from them last weekend at Smorgon, didn't we?
That's right. I mean, I really enjoyed that game in a way, and it looked like Smorgon were going to get another home win for an hour. Torpedo were beyond dreadful in the first half, you have to say. And interestingly, Vlad Tatur covered this in his Telegram channel, and he says Puntus made an absolute mess of his starting lineup by pushing our friend Samuel Odiobo in the centre of the park and Gorbachev for his first game up front. And Vladislav points out that Torpedo were lucky to be only 1-0 down at half time. You know, I think it's fair to say that Smorgon could have been 3 or 4-0 up on the hour mark. But then, of course, he brings on Kirill Premudrov and Nikita Nikolaevich, and those guys turn the game around. Premudrov alongside their talisman, Khachaturian, in the middle of the park. And the game turned in quarter of an hour, and in the end, you'd have to say that Smorgon, despite all their efforts in the first hour, were very well beaten.
I mentioned also, Adrian, about the Brazilian players. I know we talked a lot about Ramos and Veloso leaving, and obviously Montero and Oya coming. So I don't want to spend too long on it, but I think it's fair to say that we are still waiting for the best from them, and we're not quite sure why. They're not getting enough game time, really, either of them, I don't feel. Maybe something happening behind the scenes that isn't pleasing Big Yuri.
It's hard to say. There's certainly these two are not Veloso and Ramos, are they? But in their defence, they're only both 21. They're young kids. Fabrizio, in particular, has an extraordinary pedigree. I think he was in the top 100 future footballers in the world somewhere. I think The Guardian a couple of years ago. He's come from Corinthians, so he's not a mug. And we can't overlook what a culture shock it must be for two young boys leaving Brazil for the first time and ending up in Jordino. You know what? That's going to take a lot of adjusting in cultural terms. So I think they need to be given time. I think if they are given time, they'll come good in the second part of the season. But certainly they've not had the immediate impact that Lipe and Gabi had in that team last season, and that's reflected in the results. Torpedo, I think, as Adrian said on Twitter at the weekend, are really blowing hot and cold, often doing that in one game, let alone across a series of results. And as you said at the beginning of this section, Liam, it shows a sign of the expectation at the football club that they're a perfectly respectable 7th in the table at the moment, and everyone's feeling a bit disappointed. But they're a very unpredictable team this season and quite different to the one that finished last campaign so strongly.
I feel he's got a lot of questions that he hasn't really yet answered for himself, or maybe that's reflected in the teams that he's picking, which are nearly always different, aren't they? I think one of his biggest problems with Bordachev, who he doesn't seem to fancy at centre half. He then puts him at left back. I mean, that just isn't working for me at all at left back. Is he in the team? Is he not in the team? He's playing for the national team, but didn't really excel in the two most recent national games. But I wonder whether Yuri is thinking, well, he can't not get in my team if he's getting in the national team. I don't know, but that seems to be one of his many dilemmas, as you say. Odiobo's been moved all over the pitch. So they do. I think that's inevitable. They are going to be blow hot and cold because of that, because he doesn't seem to have fixed on a settled side. But to be fair, John, if they do blow hot this weekend against Shakhtyor, you'd still give them a chance, wouldn't you?
You certainly would. And you mentioned Bordachev there. Let's not forget that he's coming to the end of his career. He's 36 this year. There's not too many more years left in him. And you've got a young man coming through who's a really exciting player, also a left back, Denis Gruszewski, who pulled Torpedo out the fire against Isloch the previous weekend in that extraordinary 3-3 draw. So, they've got options. I think a bit like Bata, it's also a team in transition. He's brought in quite a few new players, and it's taking him a bit longer probably than he'd have hoped for to find his best starting 11 and to stick with it. I have to say also, Liam, if Smorgon had hung on to that win, I think Yuri's big triple XL puffer jacket might have been in a sugary nail last weekend. I don't think they'd have taken kindly to defeat by Smorgon, the directors. And you may be right, and there may be a little bit of murmuring behind the scenes there. So in that sense, this game against Shakhtyor and the possibility of an extraordinary win and putting a dent in Shakhtyor's unstoppable progress to date would really give the whole club a lift. So I think Yuri will be preparing really intensively for that and trying to find a way to get one over Grigorchuk in the game.
Do you think Adrian will see Yuri smile if by any chance the miracle happens and Shakhtyor finally lose the 100% record? Or have you ever seen Yuri smile? Or is that something that is stuff of legends?
I think he's really much closer to his players than a lot of managers are. And I think he's genuinely worried for them when they're out there on the park. And you're quite right. I mean, he paces the technical area like an expectant father, doesn't he? And yeah, it's a strange one. I think he smiles a lot in post-match press conferences. There's plenty of pictures of him smiling at their end-of-season party last year, where no doubt he'd had a few Reketskoye beers by then, So he's a good guy, Yuri, and everyone from our sort of English-speaking community who follows the game over there, I'm sure, wishes the best for him this weekend.
Indeed. So the end of part 2 has arrived. Thank you very much again, as I say, to Adrian for being brave and stepping forward. We'll be looking for somebody to do the next show. So if you wish to focus on your team for around about 5 minutes, tell us a bit about the town or the city and a bit about the history of the club and who you like that plays for that particular club. It'll be great to hear from you. But in the meantime, we'll leave part 2 behind and we'll shortly be back with part 3. So, John, we move on to the future. The future we've talked about already a little bit in terms of this weekend, Torpedo's clash with Shakhtyor. But another interesting development this week has been the announcement of the squad for the 2 upcoming slightly bizarre friendlies that are being played in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, this, of course, is Georgy Kondratiev's first couple of games as caretaker, and the ABFF chairman Bazanov said that no real decisions have been taken about the future manager, and they're going to look at these couple of games and see what happens. Quite what we're going to learn about the Belarusian national team from friendlies with Azerbaijan and Sierra Leone is not really clear, but okay. He's picked a squad that's pretty much expected, although for me, Liam, someone we've talked about a lot in these programmes, Andrei Solovey, has been called up, and hopefully he'll win his first cap, which will be well deserved given his form this season. And also Igor Zayats, also at Gomel, a right back defender, on loan from Dinamo Minsk 2s to Gomel this season. He's played every game so far, been really impressive. So Kondratiev's obviously got an eye to the future a bit and seeing who's coming through that he doesn't know about, because I think he knows the staff and the 21s pretty well. So let's see, they're strange friendlies, and it's always when you've not qualified for a tournament, and Belarus had a really good chance to qualify for Euro 2020 and blew it, then these games are always a bit sad and an afterthought. And well, what comes of the games comes of the games,
Yes, I mean, I suppose it is noticeable, isn't it, that all the sort of experienced heads. There's no Bordashev, there's no. I don't think he's picked hasn't picked Stasovic, has he? I mean, and that's fair enough, isn't it? What is the point in having these, the players of the past to a certain extent? I mean, there's nothing riding on the games. You may as well have a look at some of the younger players, mainly. And I'm delighted, like you, that Solovey's been. His start to season's been recognised. It's a fantastic story for somebody who showed a lot of promise and did play for the under-21s, I believe, didn't he? And then had to do national service, which rather didn't curtail his career, but it certainly put his career on hold for a little bit. And so it's great that his excellent form at the start of the season has been recognised. But yeah, I suppose they have to look to build for the future, albeit in a couple of rather bizarre encounters.
Yeah. And the thing to add to that, of course, is that Igor Stasovic has been absolutely honking this season. He's been terrible. There's been rather unkind speculation that he's been kidnapped and an imposter is impersonating him in the Shakhtyor team. And of course, he's hurt at the moment. He got injured in the home league match with Ruch Brest. So I don't think we'll be seeing him for a little while. And I hope he uses that time to overcome whatever's bothering him, maybe mentally or struggling to adjust to a new club. Who knows?
Indeed. So yes, we'll see what becomes of those matches, but perhaps not, as you say, not too many conclusions to be drawn from. Let's just hope that there's some promise shown by some of the players that have been given their chance. I think it's amazing to imagine that the Gomel right back this time last year was playing for the twos at Dinamo Minsk, and all of a sudden he's playing for the national team. What a wonderful story, and an indicative of what a great start Gomel have made to the season. And obviously, I'll be looking forward very much to Gomel's match this weekend. I think they're a fantastic side to watch. Very interested to see how they get on against FC Minsk. Because they're probably, of all the teams we looked at pre-season, they're the team that have surprised us the most, aren't they, really? We didn't really expect them to be anywhere other than fighting to stave off relegation, or maybe fighting to be in the top 10, should we say, at best, in 9th or 10th place. But they have done a lot better than that initially. And so that will be another tough test for Gomel. Are there any other games this weekend, John, that you're particularly looking forward to?
Well, I think that is one of the games of the weekend. Don't forget, of course, Liam, that Mr. Slido has left FC Minsk today, and they'll be having a new manager of the club, because that's what chairmen are, in there for the next few games. And there's been speculation today that that is really going to put the ball bearings under Mr. Shcherbachenko and many of the players that have been signed to play there this season. So it's going to be a really interesting one to call that. I think Gomel will have far too much for them, to be honest.
It is quite ironic, isn't it, a way that we thought Mr. Shcherbachenko would be getting his marching orders pretty quickly after a dismal start, and then actually they've not done too badly at all. And now, even despite that, it looks like he might well end up leaving. So I have to feel a little bit sorry for him.
Absolutely. But moving on from him, the other game that I'm really interested in, of course, is Dinamo against Ruch Brest. Troubled Dinamo, as we've alluded to already, and frankly, troubled Ruch as well, who've been really disappointing this season. Really turgid to watch, really, other than the Smorgon game when they absolutely demolished Smorgon at the Bresky Stadium. They've been really struggling to impose themselves in games otherwise, and their only bright spark really has been David Twe, and who knows how long he's going to stay there. He'll certainly be moving on at the end of the season, I think. We've mentioned Torpedo Shakhtyor already, and you'd have to say that at the other end of the table, Sputnik's visit to Grodno was a really important game for Igor Kavalovic. Obviously, they beat Smorgon up there, but they really need to, put Sputnik away. Sputnik are poor. They did better up at Bata, of course, but Bata, I think, had one eye in the cup final anyway. So that's a game they really have to win, and win comfortably, as a means of pulling themselves out the bottom three. And if we didn't expect FC Minsk to be in the top 10, we certainly didn't have Neman Grodno down in the bottom 6 after a third of the games were played. So Kavalovic really needs to kick on from here on in, I think.
Indeed. So, as always, plenty of intrigue. We love the Belarusian Premier League, no matter what's going on at the top, no matter how far Shakhtyor are ahead. We always find something to watch. We always find something to write about and muse about and get excited about. So, I hope you're of the same volition still, even though at the moment Shakhtyor are making it look rather easy at the top end. There's still plenty of good football to watch this weekend. We hope you manage to catch up with as much of it as possible. And we'll see you again soon.
Thanks very much for listening again, everyone. See you next time.